The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame. Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I am Reagan Kelly, and I am joined by my awesome co-host,
Laura Nash. And I have a question for you, Reagan. How well do you know fractions now that you've played Frog Fractions?
It was never my strong suit. Math has never been my best subject. But I think actually having played Frog Fractions, I now know everything there is to know about fractions.
And I know less.
That's right, we were talking this week about Frog Fractions. We've actually mentioned Frog Fractions a couple of times on the show, and we're not talking just about Frog Fractions, but we're also talking about sort of the Frog Fractions expanded universe of gaming properties. And this is a tricky one for spoiler reasons, because I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that we're not just talking about an educational game or an edutainment title. Frog Fractions is a series of games that are sort of known for hiding their complexity under the bushel of a very sort of mundane-looking game on the surface. And so we've played for this week, we're going to talk about both the original Frog Fractions and with Frog Fractions, which just got a re-release on Steam. It was originally a Flash title.
The Game of the Decade edition.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a stretch, but honestly, I guess they could make that argument if they want.
I think Polygon said it was 121st of their top 500 games of the decade.
Oh.
So they have used that as an excuse to release Game of the Decade edition.
Well, way to go to them. I think that's great. And it is I think a pretty cool and in some ways important game that you've probably already heard of if you're listening to this, but we'll still be kind of doing progressive disclosures of spoilers as we go here. So yes, the original Frog Fractions released in, I think, 2012. I'll double check that. Pretty long time ago. Yeah, 2012 as a web browser game by the solo developer whose name I think is Jim Stormdancer. And it was a surprise success for reasons that we'll have to get into a little bit past our initial spoiler discussion. But Frog Fractions is not what it seems on the surface, which is it seems to be a very basic, almost number munchery kind of fraction learning game featuring a frog eating bugs. But it's not that under the hood. And this developer, Jim Stormdancer, has released other games as part of this sort of series, over the years. And the most recent release is a re-release of Frog Fractions that includes a $10 DLC called Hop's Iconic Hat that lets you play the original Frog Fractions, but wearing a hat.
And that's all you get from the description. So all of the descriptions will just say, you can pay $10 for a hat. Tiny spoiler, as in the game, it's not just $10 for a hat.
Right. The whole gimmick of Frog Fractions is that it hides a lot of game underneath that veneer of incredible mundanity, and the DLC is no exception to that. And that's why we're here talking about it. We talked about maybe doing an episode on Frog Fractions 2, which is a bit of a spoiler to even say that, but Frog Fractions 2 was buried within the kid-oriented, fairy-themed city building simulator called Glittermitten Grove, which is actually in that bundle that we talked about recently, the bundle for racial equality on itch.io. So if you have that, you already have Glittermitten Grove, which is the container that houses Frog Fractions 2. And Frog Fractions 1 is now available completely free on Steam. You can download it and get a nice HD version that runs better than the browser version and no longer relies on you having Adobe Flash installed, which is a nice
Which
plus.
I don't think works after the fall.
Right, yeah. So
yes,
good timing for them to do a re-release of this important browser game as an actual game. But yeah, so we're mostly going to be talking about the original Frog Fractions and then the new DLC for the original Frog Fractions. We're not really going to be talking so much about Frog Fractions 2, aka Glittermitten Grove, on this episode.
And before we get into spoilers, can I say two things that this game is not, in case you're wondering? If you're hearing like kind of weird Twitter fave game, a lot under the hood, this is not secretly a horror game, and this is not secretly a game for mature audiences.
Right.
Just want to put that out there, that it's not that kind of stuff under the hood.
Yeah, it goes all in for weirdness, but does not go in for shock value.
Yes, it is not vulgar. It is clean. It is a weird game that you could show to 9 or 10-year-old. There's not even any blood in it. So
yeah, I wouldn't say that a 9 or 10-year-old would have that much fun playing it. Maybe they'd enjoy the Frog Fractions bug eating portions, but it's not going to disgust anyone, or it's not going to pull a bait and switch and seem like a childhood game that switches up and becomes a dark gross thing. It's not like that. It's more just about finding ways to surprise and delight you with strange stuff that you would not be expecting in a Frog Fraction game.
It's lawful weird.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I just remembered it's not strictly clean. There is reference to bug pornography and some blurred bugs doing it in the original Frog Fractions game. So, if the mention of the word pornography puts you off, no pun intended.
Or gets you off. Hey, we're not here to judge. Or
gets you off. I mean, if there's anything more on bug pornography that's your bag, maybe think about that in Frog Fractions.
Yeah. Bug pornography is talk about a lure to bring people in. This game includes bug pornography.
What an asterisk I need to say to this is a clean game.
Yes, that's the only asterisk. And also the bug pornography is it's bugs, guys. And it's also humorously mosaicked. So that is a good warning. Thank you, Laura. So because this is a whole series about surprises, we're kind of putting our spoiler break flag here early. We're going to first talk about Frog Fractions, the original game. We've already talked about that a little bit way back on some episode, but we've never done a full episode talking about Frog Fractions. So we're going to talk a little bit about the original Frog Fractions, which we've both replayed, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the DLC, which is, and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, a new whole Frog Fractions game buried in the You Get to Wear a Hat DLC. So that's where we're going. I'm going to start with a spoiler break just on the original Frog Fractions. We'll do a second spoiler break for Frog Fractions, N, whatever this continue. Is it 2, 3, 4, whatever it is?
Yeah, Frog Fractions, the nth power. And just before we take that spoiler break, I want to say that this new version is PC only, yes. Even though the original one, I think, was Mac Linux PC.
Yeah, it was browser-based, so it could run on anything. But yes, this one is Windows only. Yes,
and also that the first game, Frog Fractions, I replayed in like an hour and a half, and the DLC is probably about 2 hours.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and get into it, and here it is, your probably first spoiler break. So yeah, how to explain Frog Fractions 1. This was something that I played. I didn't quite play it in the original, when it first came out in 2012, it got passed around in a sort of a viral way. Being a web game, it was good for that sort of thing. And that was still the days where, everybody was checking their Twitter in front of a desktop computer, probably, that could run a Flash game in a browser. This was a time that was well set up for this sort of thing. And it wasn't the only game like this at the time. There were other games that were sort of playing with this idea of there's something more going on here than what meets the eye. But this was by far the most sort of viral and popular of those.
Yeah, there were a couple games that had a little bit of, weirdness underneath, but this one took it to multiple stages and had a lot more there. The top game, the surface level game, is so simple that I actually made a game that was a frog sitting on a lily pad eating bugs with their tongue for Discovery Channel. Yes, Discovery Channel, when I was at Cricket Moon, because they wanted some really cheap games, and I think we used it. And I think I used a screenshot from this predates Frog Fractions, but a million people have made the game where you sit on a lily pad and you click your mouse and you zap bugs.
Yeah, I think there was an Atari game that was essentially this. I have a Vectrex game that is essentially this, although it involves jumping.
Our version had pop-up facts. That was It was like because it was Discovery Channel.
As opposed to pop-up fractions.
As opposed to pop-up fractions.
I think your first hint here that this isn't just a simple edutainment game is that it completely fails as an edutainment game, because it's not asking you to actually do any math. It's literally just you eat a bug and it shows you a fraction. It doesn't actually require that you figure out anything about the fractions or convert them to decimals or anything like that. It just there are fractions that appear on screen as you're doing this very click and eat kind of thing. It's not a very good edutainment title.
Yeah, and the UI has stuff like score and fruit and dignity, Zorkmids. None of that is edutainment. It's just all nonsense.
Mm-hmm. And as you play the game, you are collecting fruit. And it's actually quite difficult to collect at first because you can't originally move. So you have to you have to buy an upgrade that lets you move around by riding a turtle. And there's a number of upgrades that you can get as you go throughout the original sort of chunk of the game, but there's things like, riding on a turtle, convert the turtle into a dragon. All of this comes from buying upgrades from a little upgrade thing that happens after every round using the fruit that you collect as you're playing the fraction game.
So my first warning of weirdness is when I was buying all these delightfully weird power-ups, and I got to a point where I'd bought most of the power-ups, and then suddenly there's a kind of artificial wall where power-ups that previously cost 10 fruit now cost 25,000 fruit. And it's clear that there's something you need to do to get a ton more fruit than what you've been doing. Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing that the place where when I first played this game years and years ago, I literally had to look this up, which made me feel very stupid. And also it's the place where lots of people have, particularly early on when this was getting passed around, would get past this game. Hey, check this out. This Frog Fractions game. This is hilarious. I don't want to tell you anything about it. I'm just going to give you this Frog Fractions game or this link to it and go check this out. It's great. And then a lot of people ended up just sort of playing the Frog Fractions game and never getting anywhere past the original sort of level of it. And it is because it's not really obvious in the game that at some point you can dive down below the water. So once you've upgraded your turtle that you're riding around on to a dragon, you can move all over the screen. And if you go down below the water, you find that all of the apples that you've been unable to grab during the course of the game have been piling up along with many thousands of others in a big pile under the water. And you can go down and collect them. And suddenly you have unlimited apples and you can go back up and use those on all of the upgrades that you previously couldn't afford, including warp drive.
It's like the Rosebud hack in Sims. Suddenly you have just so much money.
Yeah, it's great. And that feeling is really fun, but it's also after that point, the scales have fallen from your eyes and you can see into the infinite of Frog Fractions. It's really great. So we won't be going through beat by beat all of the bits in Frog Fractions, but both the original game and Frog Fractions sequel DLC that we're going to be talking about later are both sort of made up of a series of, I wouldn't exactly call them mini games because it does a good job of stringing them together into a kind of narrative, sort of. But the game has sort of an overall narrative of a frog going on a big journey, and every few minutes the game completely changes its gameplay style. So in the original Frog Fractions, there's space shooter portions. There's a portion that resembles a courtroom scene that's sort of like a Phoenix Wright. There's a portion that's done as a text adventure that's very much in the tradition of old school Infocom or Zork style text adventures. I'm trying to remember all of the different bits that come up in that.
There's a DDR parody, Dance Dance Revolution. Sorry. And then there's just a long part where you're just kind of going through a maze while you hear about the history of boxing, but a fake one.
Oh yes, completely contrafactual boxing history. That was actually really fun and amusingly written. I really liked that section.
Yeah, at the beginning of that section, when I was replaying, my audio was going in and out, and I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna have to." I was like, "I have to stop the game and fix the audio because I'm not going to go through this maze without hearing the history of boxing."
Yeah, super funny, and it's really just like a new thing every minute, and that's what was so appealing about the game to begin with. It's just like it's constantly throwing like new gameplay styles and ideas at you. It never gets hard. You know, that it's not a game about like challenge or anything. It's just a game about sort of experiencing a series of bizarre gameplay ideas strung together with a sort of a loose, absurdist plot. So the overall story is that Hop, the main character, the frog, rides his dragon friend through space and goes to Bug Mars, a planet inhabited entirely by bugs, which, as you can imagine, is both a good and terrifying thing for a frog who spent the beginning of the game eating bugs. And then you travel through various places on Bug Mars. You go through that boxing maze that Laura mentions. And finally, you get a spaceship where you can go out on a lengthy space journey away from Bug Mars.
Which is a parody of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy text-based adventure, I think.
Yeah, I think so. It's really kind of like a one puzzle, fairly simple text adventure, but it has that sort of vibe, like the sort of, a silly, absurdist puzzle based on sort of mundane stuff. And then finally, I guess you return back to Bug Mars, where you are elected president of the planet. And that's where with the Dance Dance Revolution scene that Laura mentioned, which kind of takes the place of the election, I suppose. And then at the end, there's a kind of a business simulator. And this was the other part that kind of stuck me when I was playing this the first time through. I got kind of stuck on the business simulator. The business simulator is what Laura alluded to before the spoiler break about creating bug pornography. I guess it's
lemonade stand.
Yeah, it's basically lemonade stand, only except for, you're instead of making lemonade, you're making bug porn and selling it to bugs. I thought you had to take that seriously at first. I was trying to make money by like playing the game, and you have to make a pretty significant amount of money in order to finish the game. I only realized like after quite a bit of frustrating, like not making money, that you can just, because you're the president of Bug Mars, in addition to doing in addition to a pornographer.
Doing the government, yes.
Yeah. So you're both the president and a pornographer. That you can just print money. You can tell the Fed to print money as much as you want. And no matter how badly your business is doing, within a few turns of printing the maximum amount of money, you can make all the money that you need to win the game. If only life were so easy. And that's where things end. You end as the president of Bug Mars and a highly successful bug pornographer. / frog.
With a lovely swimming pool.
Yeah. And that whole game is about an hour, and you'll breeze through it. It's just wild and weird and fun. And now it's available for free for download on your Windows PC. No Flash or browser stuff required.
I will give one caveat. You generally don't have to take any game in this seriously until you get to the fourth game, I suppose, which in this one is going to be the second one we talk about, where you actually have to solve puzzles to get through them.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Game of the Decade Edition DLC, Hop's Iconic Hat. So if you're downloading this, you might think just that this is a re-release of the original Frog Fractions, which is well known. And that's great. And it is. It is a totally functional re-release of the original game. But buried within the free download of the original game is the DLC for Hop's Iconic Hat. If you load that up, and when you first load the menu, it gives you the option to play with or without the hat. You can choose to play with the hat, and it begins with the exact same scene. The game starts exactly the same, except Hops is wearing a hat.
Yes, and this is not a sequel you can do out of order. You can, but it will make even less sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange to say that, like, Maybe we should take a quick second and talk about the other game that is Frog Fractions 2. So the numbering on this is all confusing because initially, after the success of Frog Fractions, the developer Jim Stormdancer did a Kickstarter to make Frog Fractions 2, right? And as a part of that Kickstarter, he ran an ARG that I don't actually know very much about. I've heard a little bit about it here and there, but like it was just for the Kickstarter backers, I believe, leading up to the release of Frog Fractions 2. And I think, as expected by the people that were following along with it at the time, he didn't just release Frog Fractions 2 as Frog Fractions 2. He released a game, Glittermitten Grove, we mentioned it earlier, onto Steam. And it sat there on Steam for a while before anyone knew that it was Frog Fractions 2, which I think is great, right? Like, the game Glittermitten Grove is a full game that you can play in, I think beginning to end as just a fairy city building simulator. And the game within it, or sort of beneath it, that is Frog Fractions 2, was intended as Frog Fractions 2, is it's under the hood and it's there, but you would miss it if you didn't know where to look. I actually never got into it because I found it was very difficult to get past the city building fairy simulator stuff, but neither here nor there. The numbering gets more confusing, though, because the developer Jim Stormdancer later kind of retconned in that he said that, well, actually, the ARG leading up to Glittermitten Grove was Frog Fractions 2. Glittermitten Grove is Frog Fractions 3. Hop's Iconic Hat DLC is Frog Fractions 4. But in a sense, it feels like the true Frog Fractions 2 in that it is a direct follow-up to the original Frog Fractions featuring the same character and a continuation of the quote-unquote story. Whereas Frog Fractions 2 / Glittermitten Grove was not that. It was its own thing.
Yeah, this is very much the Irishman of Frog Fractions. It's like about being older and looking back at your adventures.
I didn't put it.
That's sure. A really weird way to put it, but sure.
Yeah. So like Hop, the character, the little tree frog sprite that essentially had no true character to him in Frog Fractions 1. Here he is an older married ex-president frog. The majority of this game plays out in a a point-and-click adventure-like style. So when you boot up Frog Fractions Game of the Decade Edition and enable the hat,
you put your hat on. Mm-hmm. Yes,
it begins identical to the original Frog Fractions, but wearing a hat. But not too far into it, about the point where you would go on your adventure. Well, actually, the first thing that you'll notice is that at the point where you upgrade the turtle to become the dragon, you can notice that rather than just sort of flying around freely like the dragon usually does, he's held up by sticks in a very sort of theatrical way. And very shortly after that, when you upgrade and get the warp drive and begin to go out on your adventure, the sort of camera pulls back and you realize that you're not watching the original Frog Fractions. You're watching a play dramatizing the events of Frog Fractions 1, starring Hop, who is now no longer the president of Bug Mars. He's retired in disgrace, and he is
impeached.
Yes, he is impeached, and he is now just the he's acting out the story of his original adventure for an audience of like 3 people every night,
and. Unfortunately for Hops and for drama at large, he is being heckled, and that is what interrupts him. He's being heckled by a troll. By a terrible, terrible troll.
Yeah, what was his name again?
He's just like Content-Aware Phil.
That's right, Content-Aware Phil.
Awful emoji man.
Yeah, he's that's sort of the art style of Frog Fractions is just like including like seemingly out of place, like not particularly great art that would feel very much at home on in a edutainment game or on a motivational poster or in the GIFs at the bottom of a 90s web page, all that sort of thing. So yes, poor Hop is down on his luck. he's being heckled by an uncaring audience. All he wants to do is tell the story of his big adventure from the first game and kind of relive his glory days. But it seems like that's getting harder and harder for him to do.
And his boss is a chair that smokes a cigarette, which is probably what the hardest I laughed at this game.
Yeah, the chair was good. Very, very good. And at this point, it sort of spins out as a point-and-click adventure game. And most of the game takes place in this sort of point-and-click adventure game mode, with sort of action sequences taking on other gameplay styles in a way that sort of feels very much of a piece with the original Frog Fraction. So, we learn about Hop's home life. We go back to his house and meet his lovely wife, who, what was her name? It was like,
I know it's Patricia, but I don't know her last name.
It was like Patricia Hops Meow.
Patricia with an H.
Yeah, because she's wearing a hat, right?
Because everywhere is hats.
Yes. So Patricia Hops Meow is a cat, and that's his wife, and she is a kind of Indiana Jones parody. She's kind of got the whip and the hat, and she fairly early in the game goes off on an adventure of her own that seems much cooler than your adventure. But you keep phoning in and checking in with her, and he has a kid now. And what I think is funniest about this is that the art that was sort of the like cover art for Frog Fractions featured a kind of a bulbous 90s art looking illustration of a frog that in no way resembled Hops, the main character in the game
at all.
Yeah. But it was part of the game from I'm pretty sure the beginning. It's definitely been around since before this version of the game. And that frog is in this game. It is Hop's new, his teenage daughter, sassy teenage daughter named October Hops Meow, I guess. And October, or Toby, is, kind of a surly teen who somewhat incongruously loves to clean and organize things. And so a lot of the initial puzzles are about getting out of your apartment. Your apartment is you're protected by a Secret Service person, as all former presidents are, and you have to sneak past them along with your daughter to kind of go out on a father-daughter adventure. Man, like the daddening of games continues, right? Like even the frogs
daddening
are not.
I know.
Immune.
I do appreciate that, like, Dad is off with Toby because Mom is literally being Indiana Jones and becoming a god.
Yeah. And I actually kind of enjoy that, like, they're continuing to throw more character into this. Like, the original game had a story, quote unquote, but it was mostly just a series of bizarre and seemingly disconnected events. Whereas this feels like a story. And it feels really, I mean, it's fun. Like, I wouldn't exactly go so far as to say that, like, I really felt for Hops and his daughter or his friend the dragon or any of that, but it definitely adds something to suddenly feel like, oh, not only am I like playing out this bizarre story of bizarre events, but like it feels like getting a gang back together, even if the gang is, sprite art from a weird Flash game that you played back in 2012. It was a neat feel.
Yeah, and there's a lot about kind of nostalgia. Like, he not only is in a theater troupe reliving his adventures, they go to a museum that is just pieces of the game as exhibits. They have so many references to the first game throughout. It's kind of like he is putting his own game into a museum as part of this game of the decade, and then saying, like, cool, but we're going to have a different adventure now.
Yeah, and there's intrigue. There's an evil robot out to get Hop, and he has to reunite with his dragon friend, and there's some new gameplay styles in it that feel very, like, they're cool, like more entertaining from a gameplay perspective than almost anything in the original Frog Fractions. The two bits that I thought were the best were the game has a kind of Ikaruga style scrolling shooter section where you're riding around on the back of the dragon, and Hop and October can switch places, and so it changes the color of your shield because, of course, frogs have shields, and you're being chased by this evil robot who's firing various different, shooter style patterns of bullets at you, and the bullets are all spoilers, which I thought was hilarious. So like you're playing a very Ikaruga style shooter. It's kind of much easier than that, but like has that sort of same kind of gameplay style of switching colors to deflect different colors of bullets. And then anytime you get hit, you see a spoiler for something.
Yeah.
Very basic stuff like Luke
is Leia's sister.
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Opposite of that, Leia is Luke's sister. That would be a different spoiler.
Yeah, or like Gandalf dies, that kind of stuff. But like very, very basic like spoilers, but I think it's very funny to think of like, okay, the consequence of losing at this game is you get other stuff spoiled for you. But yeah, that was a really fun one. And then the other section that I thought was like much more accomplished from a gameplay perspective than anything in the original Frog Fractions, was about the midpoint of the game. There's a Dig Dug clone type of experience. Mm-hmm. And it's much more complex and deep than it seems on the surface. You start off in a small Dig Dug clone in the middle of the game, and then after the false credit sequence, which both games have false credit sequences, mm-hmm. you then get a super extensive version of Dig Dug. Yeah, and calling it Dig Dug is a little bit reductive. It has that visual style in that it's like sort of like low-res pixel art. And it's the digging game. Yeah, and of course, like you're digging under the ground and collecting things like diamonds. But it has some really clever little arcadey mechanics to it. So you have a limited number of ladders. So if you need to climb up a certain distance, you use those ladders, and you have to return to the surface to replenish your ladders. And there's checkpoints, and it's actually pretty neat. And I even post credits, like when you can kind of. I'm not sure exactly. I didn't get to any ending to that post credits. I played to the credits and then played some of that sort of extended version of the digging game. I don't know if there's an end to that. I suspect there is. There is. It takes some time to get to because it's so extensive. There's like 7 checkpoints. There's a lot of checkpoints, and there's a lot of videotapes to dig up, and you're a lot of tubes to send things through. Yeah. So I think it's extensive. Yeah, I think it's like the game up to the actual credits are. There's no additional types of game after that. Right, yeah. So you didn't miss anything like that. Yeah, and it's basically a complete game at that point. And that is about 2 hours. So twice as long as the original Frog Fractions, I think. And then if you count however much time you might potentially spend on that sort of Dig Dug meets Mr. Driller meets Spelunky style digging game, then there's some probably about another couple of hours of stuff there to dig into. No pun intended. Depends on how good you are at that game. Yeah, that's true. And how much patience you have. Yeah. So I really liked this. I liked it better than the original Frog Fractions in a lot of ways. It had a little bit more going on in terms of story. It was obviously like it couldn't stand alone. It requires the original Frog Fractions and like kind of requires you to have familiarity with it. If you have already played the original Frog Fractions, I'd still recommend replaying it before digging into Frog Fractions Hop's Iconic Hat DLC, just because it is going to be referencing bits from the original game pretty consistently, and that original game takes like 1 hour max to get through. So I would recommend doing them both kind of one after the other. And if you like this, then you've still got the option to go and check out Glittermitten Grove, the sort of midquel that would come between these two. Yeah, it's a shame that you can't bottle ARGs, but that is their nature. Yes, indeed. I bet there's a good YouTube video out there kind of summarizing the ARG, and I think that's probably the only way you could go back and kind of re-experience the true Frog Fractions 2. But otherwise, all this stuff is on Steam and Itch, and you can get Frog Fractions on it's for free on Steam, and you can get the DLC for $10. And I would definitely recommend it. Consider it basically your $10 purchase is funding the entirety of the Frog Fractions thing. And if you want to check out Glittermitten Grove, of course, that's also on Steam and is also a part of that itch bundle if you happen to pick that up back when we were talking about it.
Yeah, it's funny that this game is, because it was free and because it was early weird, it has kind of become part of game literacy, even if you just play the free one for a few minutes to figure out what it is. It feels kind of like one of those games that people will reference as a Frog Fractions type of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And honestly, it's fun to just play a game and not know what kind of game style is coming next.
Yeah, it has a little bit of a feel of like a narrative WarioWare.
Yeah, it's, if you like this, we also suggest you check out our episode on Pony Island. That one is a bit darker, but it is definitely the kind of morphing game for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like things that do this. You know, even if it's games like this aren't ever really able to like go deep on anything in particular, but having breadth is sometimes a big plus. Being able to get a sort of a fun shuffle of new ideas every minute just makes it really entertaining to get through. I don't think there's much replay value here, but probably doesn't matter.
Yeah, it also feels really good to have a forgiving version of that game, because often these are kind of hardcore challenge games where, like, can you get through the gauntlet? This is not a gauntlet. This is fun surprises.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I'll mention a couple of things because they're in terms of getting through the game, it is very forgiving, but there are a couple of places where it's definitely possible to get stuck. And I'm just going to mention them here real quick. In the first game, I got stuck, even this time, because it had been many years since I played the original game the first time through, I got stuck on the text adventure. And the text adventure, like a lot of text adventures, isn't super clear about your goals or how to accomplish them. You know, your goal in the text adventure is to be able to power up the sleep pod on your ship so that you can complete your, and also to turn on the navigation computer of your ship so that you can fly it back to Bug Mars. And the whole spaceship is only 3 rooms, and it's pretty easy to find the third room. It's at the bottom of your ship. You just got to move the rug and open the thing. But I did find it was a little confusing at times. So you just want to try to pick up everything. This is the obvious text adventure hint, but even places that don't seem like there's anything that you can pick up. So, for example, there is a bundle of wires protruding from a wall, and in amongst those is stuff that you can pick up. I'm not going to get into specific puzzle solutions here, but I got stuck on that bit. If you're really stuck, solution to that is a Google search away. Don't let it kill your momentum through this thing, because it's not really meant to be that sort of thing. It's meant to be a couple of minutes in this text adventure mode and then move on.
Yes, and where I got stuck in the text adventure is you will at some point encounter a piece of paper, and they will say that the piece of paper is in your game package. That does not mean that it is a file in the computer's game package.
Yeah, it's a joke, right? It's just a joke about how old games would sometimes include those sorts of feelies.
But I've been trained from games like Pony Island or Undertale, that sometimes you do need to look at files. That is just a joke. Move on. And also, if you take the paper, the tape does not come with it.
Good point. Yeah, that was definitely another thing that kind of stuck me up. And the other thing would be I didn't get stuck very often in the DLC portion of the game, but I did get a little bit lost at there's a sort of a final boss encounter that takes the form of a very simple JRPG fight. And the first thing about it that's a little confusing is that each time you're giving a command you got 4 characters at that point, and you can tell any of the 4 of them to attack any of the characters on screen. So you can attack the enemy robot that you're fighting, or you can have your party members attack each other, which seemed confusing at the start. And I ended up dying a lot because I was trying to figure out how to game the HP meters. But if you let that fight go more than a few turns, he will kill you. And I died quite a few times going through it. And until I actually think I had to look up a YouTube video of somebody playing through that fight, which made me feel very stupid when I realized that each character has a kind of a limit break. When they take a certain amount of damage, they automatically do a big attack. And I just think about how to activate those limit breaks for all of your party members, even the ones that you may not like. That would be the way I'd put it in terms of a lightweight spoiler light hint is try to activate those limit breaks, even for the characters that you may not be particularly fond of.
Yeah, and that's a case where I think the game has trained you that often dying a couple times is part of the game. In that section, it is not.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's not going to stop you. You can die and start it over, no big deal.
But the dying does not progress the game.
Right, yeah. And I was confused, and I ended up probably dying like 5 or 6 times there before I realized what I needed to do to kind of push things forward.
I very seriously played that solitaire game. For a while.
Yeah, I immediately failed the solitaire game. Like, I immediately failed it. And when you fail it, it does, it progresses the game. Like you lose solitaire once, I think. And I'm not sure. I didn't even know you could play it.
I mean, how do you fail solitaire?
I just randomly clicked a bunch of cards.
Oh, like I played all the way to almost the end, but so you get, did you get to the part where, so in the solitaire game, you're playing normal solitaire and then suddenly you get like actual magic cards?
No, I didn't get that.
That cast spells?
No, I was like, I don't really feel like engaging with solitaire, and I bet this game isn't going to make me. So I just like started like dragging and dropping cards onto each other at random. And very quickly, what it does is the solitaire game ends, and you get that Windows 95 solitaire animation where the cards
that 52 card pickup,
out of the thing, but they are all jumping out of the screen and onto the ground, which I thought was very
so cool. If you take solitaire seriously, it's normally in solitaire, and then you start getting games like cards from the game of sets for like the squiggle lines in it that don't do anything, and then you get and then at some point during the first way through the deck, you get 2 magic cards. You get Fireball and Heal. And what Fireball does is it will take an entire stack of your cards that you've made, and if you click on any card, everything under that will go back into the deck.
That's great. I completely missed that. That's really cool.
And then if you cast Heal, it will transform the entire column, including if you've got weird cards, like there's Uno cards in the deck, and there are like tarot cards in the deck. And if you cast Heal on them, they will turn into hearts cards. But you find eventually that you can cast Heal and everything will turn to hearts, so then you can't beat the game.
No!
So you end up with like multiple versions of hearts. So I got through almost the whole, like I got up to like 10s, like where everything across was in 10s, but I'd accidentally turned too many things into hearts and couldn't beat the game. So when I hit deal again and they were like, hey, you want to play 52 card pickup? I was like, no, I want to play the solitaire game again. That was great.
That's very funny. I completely missed that entire section. I guess it just sort of like, if you act like you don't care about solitaire, it just takes you at your word and just like throws all the cards on the ground, which is great. Yeah. Well, that's really neat. I enjoyed playing through this. Given that, so I should probably mention, I didn't mention at the top of the show that thank you for bearing with us through our brief hiatus there. I just finished my parental leave for baby number 2, and I am back to work and back to the podcast, but I'm still taking care of a very small baby. And so things are still a little wonky for me. And so please forgive us for any wonkiness with the podcast. But we are back to it. So eager to get back to playing and talking about video games. If you have any suggestions of short video games that you'd like to hear about on the show, and I'll put out a personal call specifically, I would really, really love games that I can play on things like the Switch or even on a phone, because it's the kind of time for me right now where that is more convenient. Then throw those suggestions to us.
And we'll say short games on the phone.
Yes.
So we are getting a lot of recommendations for long games on the phone.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing is like my time is also extremely limited right now. So, Frog Fractions 2, I think I spent altogether maybe 3 hours covering all of this Frog Fractions stuff. But that was 3 hours spread across like 5 days. So I am definitely in need of your real short recommendations right now, so that we can stay on schedule. Would love to hear about those 1 hour games that you have been saving up for us.
We did a 45-minute episode on a 15-minute game, the Emerald Heist with the tiger in the name.
Yes.
Dr. Langeskov.
Langeskov. Yes.
Langeskov. So there's no game too short.
Quite true. So throw them at us, and you can do that either via Twitter @_shortgame or on our website, www.theshortgame.net, where we've got a contact form. Or, of course, you can join us on Patreon and join our Discord. And that's the best place to chat with us about the games that we're playing or make suggestions and all of that stuff. So our Patreon is patreon.com/theshortgame, or you can find a link from our website. And all of our listeners at $1 a month or more get immediately admitted to our members only Discord, where we talk about all this stuff. And we would love to see you there. Thanks very much for anyone who is supporting us. And so thanks for joining us on this belated episode. Glad to be back to it. You can find me on the internet at Reagan K. That's RayGanK on Twitter. And Laura, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Laura J. Nash.
And thank you so much for listening to The Short Game.